Rain tapped softly against the car window as Elena stared at the familiar street she once called home. Every house looked smaller than she remembered, but her childhood home still stood proudly at the end of the block. White walls, dark wooden shutters, and the porch her mother used to decorate with flowers every spring. For a moment, Elena almost smiled. Then reality returned. Her mother had been gone for 3 years, and nothing inside that house felt like home anymore. She tightened her grip on the steering wheel before finally stepping out into the cold evening air. The scent of wet grass instantly brought back memories of happier days, birthday parties in the backyard, late night hot chocolate during storms, and her mother's laughter echoing through the kitchen. But those memories belonged to another life. The front door opened before she could knock. Vanessa stood there wearing a silk blouse and an expression colder than the weather outside. "Well," her stepmother said, crossing her arms, "you actually came." Elena forced a polite smile. "Dad called me. He said his recovery was getting harder." Vanessa stepped aside without warmth. "He's upstairs." No hug, no welcome home, just distance. Elena walked into the house slowly, noticing how different everything looked. Her mother's paintings were gone. The antique clock from the hallway had disappeared. Even the soft cream-colored curtains her mother loved had been replaced with expensive dark velvet ones that made the house feel lifeless. It no longer felt alive, it felt staged. From upstairs, her father's weak voice called out, "Elena." She hurried toward the staircase. Her father looked older than she remembered. His recent surgery had drained the strength from his face, and guilt instantly twisted inside her chest for staying away so long. He smiled weakly when he saw her. "There's my girl." The words nearly broke her. She sat beside him carefully. "How are you feeling?" "Better now that you're here," he whispered. For the next hour they talked quietly about his health, medication, and recovery therapy. For the first time in years, Elena felt something close to peace until dinner. The dining room looked beautiful on the surface. Candles, polished dishes, expensive wine glasses. But the tension sitting at the table poisoned everything. Vanessa barely looked at Elena while serving food. Her 2 teenage sons scrolled on their phones without speaking. And Elena's father stayed unusually quiet, so Vanessa finally said, sipping wine, "How long are you planning to stay?" Elena blinked. "Just until Dad recovers more." Vanessa gave a fake smile. "That sounds expensive." Her father shifted uncomfortably. "Vanessa, what?" she said lightly. "I'm only asking. Utilities go up. Food costs money." Elena placed her fork down slowly. "I can help with expenses." Vanessa laughed softly, the kind of laugh meant to insult. "With what job exactly? Last I heard, you were still jumping between freelance projects." The words stung because they were partly true. After losing her mother, Elena's life had fallen apart for a while. Depression destroyed her motivation, and rebuilding herself had taken years. Still, she stayed calm. "I'm doing fine," Elena replied quietly. Vanessa leaned back in her chair. "Funny, because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you suddenly remembered your father exists now that he owns a valuable property." Silence filled the room instantly. Elena stared at her in disbelief. "Excuse me. You heard me, Vanessa," her father warned softly. But Vanessa ignored him completely. "This family spent years cleaning up emotional messes while you disappeared," she snapped. "Now you walk back and acting like this place still belongs to you." Elena felt heat rise into her chest. "I never said that." Vanessa slammed her wine glass onto the table hard enough to make everyone jump. "Because it doesn't," she shouted. "This house belongs to real family." The room froze. Elena slowly looked toward her father, waiting, begging silently for him to say something, anything, but he lowered his eyes and said nothing. That silence hurt more than Vanessa's cruelty ever could. Elena stood carefully, her hands trembling. Tears burned behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall in front of Vanessa. "I understand," she whispered. Without another word, she walked upstairs, grabbed her bag, and headed toward the front door. Behind her, she heard her father call weakly, "Elena, wait." But she couldn't. Not anymore. As she opened the hallway closet searching for her coat, something slipped from the top shelf and fell onto the floor. A small brown folder. Confused, Elena picked it up. Across the front, written in her late mother's handwriting, were 5 words that made her heart stop. For Elena, when the time comes, Elena sat alone inside her tiny apartment, staring at the brown folder resting on the kitchen table. Outside, the city buzzed with life, car horns, distant sirens, people laughing somewhere below her window, but inside the room, silence wrapped around her like heavy chains. She had barely slept since leaving her father's house 3 days earlier. Vanessa's words still echoed in her mind. This house belongs to real family. What hurt most wasn't the insult. It was her father's silence. Elena slowly traced her fingers across her mother's handwriting on the folder cover. Even after all these years, seeing those familiar letters made her chest ache. For Elena, when the time comes, her mother had written this before she died, which meant she knew someday Elena would need it. Taking a shaky breath, Elena finally opened the folder. Inside were property papers, bank documents, insurance records, and several handwritten letters neatly clipped together. Confused, she pulled out the first official document. Her eyes widened immediately. Property owner Margaret Hayes. Purchase date 8 years before marriage. Elena blinked several times, certain she was misunderstanding something. She grabbed another document, then another. Every paper confirmed the same shocking truth. The house had never belonged to her father. It had belonged entirely to her mother. And according to the legal transfer, papers signed shortly before her death, ownership now belonged to Elena. Her hands began trembling. "No way," she whispered. She quickly opened one of the handwritten letters. "My sweet Elena, if you are reading this, then it means I'm no longer here to protect you myself. I know this family will become complicated after I'm gone, especially where Vanessa is concerned. Your father has a kind heart, but sometimes kind people become weak people. That house was my mother's dream before it ever became theirs. I bought it long before your father and I married. I leave it to you not because of money, but because it carries our memories, our love, and every piece of you growing up. Promise me something, never let anyone make you feel like you don't belong there." Tears blurred Elena's vision. For years, she had believed she was the outsider, but her mother had known the truth all along. The next morning, Elena visited an old downtown office building where a brass sign read, "Daniel Carter, Family Attorney." The elderly receptionist smiled gently after hearing Elena's name. "Mr. Carter has been expecting you someday," she said quietly. Those words sent chills through Elena. Minutes later, a gray-haired lawyer entered the office holding the same sadness Elena felt. "You look exactly like your mother," he said softly. Elena sat across from him and placed the folder on his desk. "I need to know if these documents are real." Mr. Carter adjusted his glasses carefully while reviewing the papers. After several long minutes, he nodded. "They're completely legitimate." Elena's heart pounded. "So the house legally belongs to me?" "Yes." She leaned back in stunned silence. Mr. Carter folded his hands. "Your mother trusted me to protect these records until you were emotionally ready to handle them. Did my father know?" The lawyer hesitated. "Yes." Pain spread through Elena's chest again. "He knew," she whispered. Mr. Carter sighed heavily. "After your mother passed away, your father struggled deeply. Vanessa gradually took control of the finances, the house decisions, everything. I warned him multiple times that the property legally belonged to you." Elena stared down at the papers. "So Vanessa knows too. I believe she suspects it," he admitted. "Which is why she's been pressuring your father recently." Elena frowned. "Pressuring him for what?" Mr. Carter opened another file from his cabinet. Inside were recent property transfer requests and partial sale applications. Vanessa had secretly been trying to sell pieces of the property without Elena's permission. A cold calmness settled over Elena's emotions. Not rage, not sadness, something sharper. For years Vanessa had treated her like unwanted trash while living inside a house that never belonged to her. And now she wanted to profit from it. Mr. Carter studied Elena carefully. "You could remove them legally immediately," but Elena slowly shook her head. "No," she said quietly. The lawyer looked surprised. Elena closed the folder gently, her voice calmer than it had been in years. "She embarrassed me in front of everyone." Her eyes hardened. "Now I want the truth to embarrass her back." For the first time since her mother died, Elena felt something powerful return inside her. Not hatred, strength. And far across town, Vanessa sat inside Elena's house, laughing with friends over wine. completely unaware that everything she believed she controlled was already slipping through her fingers. Music floated through the house as expensive glasses clinked together beneath glowing chandelier lights. Vanessa walked proudly through the crowded living room wearing a sparkling silver dress, greeting guests like royalty inside a palace she believed she owned. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" she said proudly to a group of women admiring the newly renovated dining area. "I practically rebuilt this house from the ground up." Everyone complimented her taste, her elegance, her perfect family. Vanessa smiled wider with every word. Tonight was her wedding anniversary celebration, and she had invited everyone who mattered: business partners, wealthy friends, neighborhood elites, and distant relatives she barely tolerated. She wanted admiration, attention, proof that she had won. At the center of it all sat Elena's father, Richard, quietly holding a glass of untouched champagne. While guests laughed around him, he looked exhausted. Guilt had haunted him ever since Elena left the house. He had called her 7 times. She never answered. "Smile," Vanessa whispered sharply while fixing his tie. "People are watching." Richard forced a weak expression, then the front door opened. At first, nobody noticed. But slowly, conversations began fading one by one as silence spread across the room. Elena had arrived. She stepped inside wearing a simple black dress, calm and composed, her posture carrying a confidence Vanessa had never seen before. Behind her walked Mr. Carter, holding a leather briefcase. Vanessa's fake smile disappeared instantly. "What is she doing here?" she hissed. Richard stood up immediately. But Elena kept walking calmly toward the center of the room. Every eye followed her. Vanessa crossed her arms tightly. "You have some nerve showing up after disappearing." Elena looked at her quietly. "I came because this concerns me." Vanessa laughed coldly. "Nothing in this house concerns you anymore." The words hung in the air. But this time Elena didn't flinch. Instead, she turned toward the guests. "I'm sorry to interrupt the party," she said politely. "But since everyone is here celebrating family, I think the truth deserves to be celebrated too." Vanessa's face tightened. "What nonsense are you talking about?" Mr. Carter stepped forward calmly as legal representative for the Hayes estate. He announced, "I'm here regarding ownership of this property." The room instantly fell silent. Vanessa blinked. Ownership. Richard's face lost color. Elena slowly reached into the folder she carried and removed several documents. "This house," she said steadily, "was purchased by my mother 8 years before she married my father." Guests exchanged confused looks. Vanessa laughed nervously. "That proves nothing." Mr. Carter opened his briefcase. "Actually, it proves everything." He handed copies of the official records to several stunned guests nearby. The property remained solely under Margaret Hayes' ownership until her passing. He explained, per her legally binding will, ownership transferred entirely to her daughter, Elena Hayes. A shocked murmur spread through the room. Vanessa's face turned pale. "That's impossible," she snapped. "It's fully verified," Mr. Carter replied calmly. Vanessa turned toward Richard desperately. "Say something," but Richard couldn't speak. Because it was true. Elena looked directly at Vanessa, her voice still calm. "So when you screamed that this house belongs to real family," she paused softly, "you were standing in my house." Several guests looked away awkwardly. Others stared openly at Vanessa in disbelief. Her perfect image was cracking apart in front of everyone. "You manipulated him," Vanessa suddenly shouted, pointing at Elena. "You planned this." "No," Elena replied quietly. "My mother planned ahead because she knew exactly who you were." Vanessa's breathing became uneven. Then Mr. Carter delivered the final blow. "There's another matter," he said firmly. "We also discovered unauthorized attempts to sell portions of the property without the legal owner's consent." The room exploded with whispers. Richard looked horrified. "Vanessa, you tried to sell the property." Vanessa stammered. I was handling investments for us. Elena interrupted softly, "Or for yourself." Vanessa looked around desperately, but the admiration she enjoyed earlier had vanished completely. The same people who praised her minutes ago now watched her with judgment and disgust. Her social mask was gone. Richard slowly lowered his head into his hands. "I failed you," he whispered to Elena, tears filling his eyes. God, I failed you so badly. For a moment, Elena almost broke emotionally hearing those words, but years of pain held her steady. Vanessa grabbed her purse angrily. This is ridiculous. You can't throw us out. Elena met her eyes calmly. I won't, she said. Vanessa looked confused. Then Elena took a slow breath, but the law will. And for the first time in years, Elena no longer felt like the unwanted outsider standing at the edge of someone else's family. Because the truth had finally spoken louder than cruelty ever could, the house felt strangely quiet after Vanessa left. No sharp voice echoed through the hallways anymore, no forced laughter, no cold tension hanging over every room like invisible smoke. For the first time in years, the house could finally breathe again. Elena stood alone in the living room early the next morning, sunlight spilling gently across the wooden floors. Dust floated through the golden light, while silence wrapped around her peacefully. It almost felt like her mother was there again. She slowly walked toward the fireplace and touched the old family photo sitting on the shelf, one Vanessa had shoved into storage years ago. Her mother's smile looked warm and alive, frozen forever in happier days. You protected me even after you were gone, Elena whispered softly. Behind her, footsteps approached carefully. Richard stood near the doorway looking older than ever. Not physically, emotionally. Regret had aged him overnight. Elena, his voice cracked slightly. Can we talk? She stayed silent for a moment before nodding gently. Richard walked into the room slowly, like a man carrying invisible weight on his shoulders. His eyes were red from sleepless nights. I don't expect forgiveness, he began quietly, not after everything. Elena crossed her arms lightly, protecting herself from reopening old wounds. You stood there, she said softly. You heard her tell me I wasn't family. Richard lowered his eyes immediately. I know, Elena replied, tears slowly forming. You knew long before that night. The truth hit him hard because it was real. He had seen Vanessa's cruelty for years, and he had chosen silence every single time. I was weak, he admitted painfully. After your mother died, I fell apart. Vanessa took control of everything little by little, and instead of fighting, I let her. Elena looked away, trying to steady her emotions. I needed my father, she whispered. Richard's face crumbled completely. I know, he said through tears. And I failed you. The room became painfully quiet. For years, Elena imagined hearing those words. She imagined anger, satisfaction, revenge. But standing here now, looking at the broken man in front of her, she mostly felt sadness. Because losing her mother had destroyed both of them in different ways. Richard carefully reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a small silver key. I found this hidden in your mother's old drawer, he said. It opens the attic chest she always kept locked. Elena frowned slightly before taking the key. Together, they climbed the narrow attic stairs. Dust covered old furniture beneath white sheets, and the scent of cedar wood filled the air. In the far corner sat a large wooden chest. Elena's hands trembled as she unlocked it. Inside were dozens of carefully preserved memories. Childhood drawings, birthday cards, photo albums, her mother's handwritten recipes. Even Elena's tiny ballet shoes from when she was 6 years old. At the very top rested another envelope, for both of my loves. Elena slowly opened it while Richard stood beside her silently. If you are reading this together, then maybe healing finally found its way home. Family is not measured by blood, control, or pride. It is measured by who stays beside you when life becomes difficult. Take care of each other when I no longer can. And please keep this house filled with love. By the time Elena finished reading, both she and her father were crying openly. Years of pain, silence, and distance suddenly felt smaller than the love her mother had left behind. Weeks later, the house slowly transformed again. The dark velvet curtains disappeared. Her mother's paintings returned to the walls. Fresh flowers sat on the porch once more. Warmth came back room by room. One Sunday evening, Elena hosted a small dinner with a few close relatives and loyal family friends who had supported her quietly through everything. Laughter filled the dining room naturally this time. No pretending, no cruelty, no fear. As everyone talked happily around the table, Elena stepped onto the porch alone for a moment, watching the sunset paint the sky gold and pink. This house once held heartbreak, then betrayal, then war, but now it finally held peace again. Richard stepped beside her quietly. "Your mother would be proud of you," he said softly. Elena smiled through emotional eyes. For years, she thought revenge meant making someone suffer the way she suffered. But standing here now, she realized the sweetest revenge was something far more powerful. It was reclaiming her voice, her home, her worth, and filling the very place meant to break her with love stronger than bitterness could ever destroy.